Thank you.
Mark is a modern work evangelist at Atlassian and is talking about teamwork today. Is that right?
I am.
It's a topic which is not only important for us, but I guess a lot for Atlassian as well.
We do care.
So I am very excited what you have to tell us today, and the stage is yours.
Awesome.
See you later.
Well, thank you all so much for having me today. I'm super excited. As I said, my name is Mark Cruth. I'm Atlassian's modern work evangelist. So essentially what that means is I get to spend my days working with teams inside of Atlassian, outside of Atlassian, our customers, our partners. And basically what I do is I help them, not necessarily with our tools, but with their practices. I help them figure out how do they work better. Maybe you need to improve the way you meet together. Maybe you're focusing on, hey, how do I have a better planning session together? My goal is to take my experience and actually go out there and work with teams. And then the cool part is that I get to come to events like this and tell stories about that. So absolutely love doing it. So I figure, we've been getting to know each other the last day and a half here. Let's get to know each other a little bit more. And for today's session, we're going to be focusing on science, and not just any kind of science, the magical science, alchemy. And so why not practice that a little bit? So to kick things off, we're actually going to do a little experiment here. And so what I need you all to do, you're all going to join me on this, those on the remote broadcast too. I want you to get out your phones. Let's get out those phones. And then I want you to go ahead and you're going to scan this QR code or just go to that URL. One of the two. So give you a moment to do that. And then once you have that, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to get to know each other. That's a little bit more. Maybe find out some interesting things that we wouldn't have thought. So let's do this. So the first question I have, it should be appearing on your device. If not, you can go to the very top. It should allow you to get there. If you were to go to the beach, would you rather play in the sand or actually play in the water? Or maybe neither. Maybe you're the person who's like, I don't go to the beach. Well, yeah, all right. Looks like we're winning here with water. We got neither coming in. All right, give you a few more seconds. See, and to me, it makes sense. You're going to be at the beach. You better go in the water, right? All right, so that was a tame question. That was a tame one. This one might get a little controversial. So I was in the Christmas market yesterday, just down the road, and I saw a lot of bratwursts out there, and it got me thinking. Is a bratwurst in a bun a sandwich? What do you think? Yes, no, maybe it depends on what you put on it. What do you think? Oh, so I'm going to say this right now. You are the one group that has definitely said no. A lot of times, like I'm from the States near Chicago, and so you get a Chicago dog, and you're like, yeah, that's kind of a sandwich. But here, you have given me your opinion. All right, so now I have probably the most important question of the day. All right, be prepared. How long would you survive a zombie apocalypse? Let's say we leave today and the undead are living. 1 day, 1 week, maybe a month, or forever. You're the biggest Walking Dead fan there is. You're actually devastated right now because it's ended. So where are we at? Oh, okay, it looks like most of us probably not going to make it very long. Oh, but you know what? Forever's coming out here. All right. Oh, this is, what I will say, I've run this question in other places before. And the thing is most of the time, not a lot of people in forever. So I think I know where I need to be now when the undead come back. So again, for all those who are down there at that level, just come see me afterwards. So good work. Thanks for playing with me on this one. All right. So the reason I do this exercise, it's all about uncovering some information. It's all about searching for things. It's also about maybe getting a little out of your comfort zone, answering questions that you might not have ever thought to answer. And really, that's what science is all about. That's what we want to talk about today. And so for me, when I think about this, I think we should probably go in and actually just embrace a scientific feel of today's event. So let me just welcome you to this laboratory we're in. Well, I don't really feel like it's a laboratory yet. So let's kind of change that up. So give me a moment. Gotta get myself situated. If we're gonna be doing some science, you got to get the lab coat, right? Got to get that feel. And we're gonna be playing with some little crazy science. So got to get the mad scientist goggles on. All right, that feels about right. That feels right. All right, let's try that one more time. Welcome to my laboratory. That feels right. That's the tone. That I don't have any flashing lights or thunder, but you can get the idea here because we're going to be playing with science today, and not the normal kind. We're going to be playing with the medieval kind. We're going to be playing with this idea of alchemy. Now, if you're familiar with this idea, you know alchemy is all about turning lead into gold. It's all about turning something worthless into something coveted, something priceless. Well, alchemy is pretty cool, but I want to talk to you about a new form of alchemy, one that's at a higher level. It's called interpersonal alchemy. And this is all about taking that okay group of people, honestly, turning them into a kick-ass team. That's the thing we want to solve. So let me paint a picture for you what I mean by this. Back in 2011, I had the opportunity to work at probably one of the highest performing teams of my career. I was working for Boeing, and I was working with their maintenance delivery toolbox for the 787 aircraft. Basically, it was a device that gave you all the information you needed to know on the aircraft. So, awesome. Airplanes released. We're doing some cool stuff. Well, 2 years after the delivery of these 787 aircraft, which, by the way, were like the leading edge thing, the FAA grounds the entire fleet. You can't fly them, you can't make them, you can't do anything. And the reason? All of a sudden, at about 36,000 feet cruising altitude, people started smelling something. It smelled like smoke. The lithium-ion batteries on board started catching fire. Again, that's nothing anyone wants to hear at that cruising altitude. So the FAA said, nope, we can't fly. Now, the engineers at Boeing, they're genius. They figured out how to solve this. They even went and talked with the likes of groups like Tesla and others to try to find a way to solve this. So perfect, we've got a fix within like a month. The FAA wouldn't let us fly unless we updated the maintenance toolbox, because essentially our customers are going to go update that afterwards. So we thought, oh yeah, that should be easy. Not so much. When you actually think about the changes that have to be made to that toolbox, with the technical diagrams, the digital renderings, it could take anywhere from 3 to 6 months. I mean, we didn't have that time. We were burning millions of dollars every day with this problem. And so our team, the team I was on, we owned the toolbox. We were responsible for its delivery. And we said, we've been together for some time now. We were focused on how can we solve this from a team perspective. We never really found that crystallizing moment until this time. We said, all right, we trust each other. We're focused in on what each other brings to the table. Let's go out there and try to solve this. And over the next couple weeks, we spent time kind of problem solving, having very open brainstorming. And you know what we did? In less than a month, we ended up getting that fix out there in a safe and fast way. It was amazing. Those planes were flying. And the thing is to this day, I still look at this as one of the highest performing teams I've had the opportunity to work on. And the reason has to do with the fact that we had that crystallized purpose. All of a sudden, yeah, we were working together, but now we had that place, that thing we were aiming towards. We also, again, had the skills and we had the trust. And then one thing that really made it powerful for us is as we were working on this, our leadership gave us the autonomy to act. They said, hey, if you need to do things to help us get there, let us know, we'll help you. But we trust you, you're the ones closest to the work. So for me, it was an amazing experience. Now, I have a question for y'all. Who here believes that maybe you've been on a high-performing team like that? Who feels like someday, one time in your career, you felt that power, that energy on a team? Couple hands, right? Feels pretty good, doesn't it? But here's the problem. Only a few hands went up. Only a few people really get to experience that. And those folks who actually raise your hands, I bet most of the time, that's not the feeling you have. That was probably a past experience or a blip. The reality is most teams don't have the ingredients to reach that high performance. So at Atlassian, we do a State of Teams report every year. And in that report, we look at things like team health. And a fact I want to share with you is today, only about 13% of teams have the actual ingredients needed to reach high performance. That means these are healthy teams that can actually accomplish, crazy feats. When we actually look at this, the goal of interpersonal alchemy is about how do we unlock the other 87%? How do we go in there and enable those teams to be able to reach that potential? And that's what we're going to talk through today. So I figure we're going to get into this thing. I want to tell you a little story along the way. And to help us do that, why not use some more scientific elements, right? So for me, I want to bring out our friend, the scientific method. We all learned this, remember, in grade school. We were probably 10 or 11. Our science teacher taught us this, and then all of a sudden we had to go dissect a frog, using the method. And I apologize if that brought about any repressed memories from that. Not my intention. But basically, I want to use this as our narrative path as we go through and kind of learn about how we can help unleash these teams. I want to talk about the question that we really want to ask here. What is it we want to find out? From there, let's talk about some example teams. What teams are out there, and what are they doing to help make them high-performing? We can then use that data to generate a hypothesis and ultimately do some experimentation. I want to share with you practices out there that you can put in place essentially tomorrow to help your teams unleash some of that potential. And then we'll talk about how we look at that data and ultimately share it out. So that's our plan. So let's go ahead, let's talk about our question. So at the beginning of any scientific endeavor, we've got to figure out what's the question that we want to ask. What are we trying to understand? Now, in the world of team performance, you could be asking a bunch of questions. You could be asking something to the effect of, is putting all the high-performing individuals on a team together, does that equal high performance? Like, we got all our all-stars here. Maybe. Well, what if we gave them unlimited budget? They could buy all the hardware, software, ping pong tables, you name it. Whatever they needed, they have it. Does that unleash some potential in teams? I don't know. What about we give them a challenge? What about if we give them a career-making thing to work towards? Could that unleash some high performance? Again, maybe. To me, I think the problem with these kind of questions is that they're too narrow. They're also kind of leading the witness a little bit. They're kind of saying, well, I think this might be it. To me, I actually want to take a step back. And the question that I actually had that when I started going through this, why do some teams perform better than others? Why do we see some teams that seem to have all the right skills kind of flounder, while those underdogs all of a sudden rocket to the top? I think with this question, we could probably go in and do some research, find some teams that we can see have what it takes. So cool, I've got my question. I like this question, and I think I can head into that research phase. All right, so let's talk about some stories. And that's what research is all about. Now we're going to go out there and figure out, hey, what's going on? And so for us, today I want to go through essentially 3 different stories of teams that I believe represent some real high-performing performance attitude. Now, a lot of us work in software, so I don't necessarily want to talk about software teams. I want to talk about other teams because, honestly, high performance exists across all teams. So I want to give you some unconventional examples, things that can hopefully get you thinking about different ways you can apply it to your team. So let's start with the first one. The first one is one that I absolutely love because I absolutely love the film, and that's going to be the story of Pixar and the movie Toy Story. So who here has seen Toy Story? I imagine most of us. Yeah, most of us has probably seen it, and if not, you've heard of it, right? It's the iconic film. It blazed the trail for digital animation that we see today. It's also like 27 years old, so if that makes you feel old, I'm sorry. But yes, it was an amazing movie. And the thing is if it was Pixar's first full feature movie. Pixar, as you know, was a small company that started by Steve Jobs after he was kicked out of Apple. He actually bought the graphics division of Lucasfilms to actually create this one, because George Lucas didn't think that animation had a place in filmmaking in the future. He was a little wrong with that. But at the time, he said, all right, yeah, I'll sell it to you. He sold it to him for $5 million. So now he's got a team. And within that team, he's got some high-performing players. Some of the folks, of course, include himself, Steve Jobs. He's the visionary. He's the one that helps kind of bring a lot of energy to things. You got folks like Ed Catmull, who was an amazing programmer and was also a magician when it came to movie making. You have people like Alvy Ray Smith, who was a designer and essentially an artist, who was responsible in Xerox PARC for a lot of the graphical interfaces we were seeing in the early stages of computing. And then we had the master storyteller. John Lasseter was the mastermind behind bringing in narrative. And so we've got the right people, right? We got all these all-star players. But with that team, did you know that Toy Story almost didn't happen? It almost got shelved. And here's why. Back in 1991, Disney actually contracted with Pixar to say, hey, we want you to make 3 movies for us, Toy Story being the first one. And for Pixar, they're like, this should be easy. We've done a number of short films. We've actually won Oscars for them. One of them was called Tin Toy, and that was actually the genesis of Toy Story. So they said, we can do this. So they spent a couple of years building the film. 1993 rolls around, right around November, right around this time. They do an early screening of the film with Disney and the Pixar teams, and they're watching it. And after the film's over, they have this kind of look at each other, and there was a general consensus. It was awful. It was one of the worst movies they'd ever seen. Basically, there was no plot, character development was terrible, and the protagonist, Woody, the cowboy, he was a jerk. Nobody liked him, and no one could relate to him. And I really have a hard time thinking of Tom Hanks as a jerk. I can't do that. And so, but Pixar made it happen. And so, again, the story was lacking, and the line goes, pressure can turn coal into diamonds. And that's what Pixar did. They actually did a few things right away after they learned that, hey, we moved in the wrong direction. They said, you know what? We need to institute some regular feedback cycles. And so they put in place what they call dailies. Dailies are sessions that they use to essentially give feedback, get progress, understand where they're at. Every day they met, and they talked about what was going on. The interesting thing is this actually helped create a culture of feedback, and it actually eliminated some of the culture they had of essentially being defensive of their work. I mean, all of a sudden you went from a world where now you would work on some animation for 2-3 weeks and then show the final product and go, see, isn't it amazing? And they're like, that doesn't feel good. They said, we got to do this more quickly. I mean, who'd have thought, right? They also went through and they said, we've got to eliminate our decision-making by committee mentality. One of the things that Pixar had going on inside them is they were pulling all the feedback and allowing this committee just to make the changes. They were incorporating everything in, and so no one was getting anything they liked. They said, you know what? We need to decentralize some of this decision-making and actually put it to the people who are accountable for the work. So they said, you know what? Director and producer, you are the decision makers. We will give you opinions, but you have to make the final call. And what it actually did is it helped them move faster. It actually allowed them to take in all these pieces of feedback and then determine which ones they wanted to pivot on quickly. So it actually helped them a lot. Even Steve Jobs, who we all know Steve Jobs, he was kind of like a bull in a china shop, as they would say. He said, I can't make decisions here. It's not my place. So it was really radical for them to be able to do something like that. And then the final thing they did is they said, we need to have a core mission, a core belief of what we're doing. They knew they were in the filmmaking industry, but they needed to believe that Toy Story was actually changing the way filmmaking was going to be done. And it took them coming together and seeing this, experiencing this issue that actually kind of, again, crystallized them around, we're trying to change film. And so after they did this, about 2 weeks after that initial feedback, they went to town, they redid the first third of the film, they got some initial feedback, it was good. And then in 1995, the film went out, and the story's already told. It was an amazing film. It made $362 million in gross sales, one of the highest animated films out there. And then, as we know, Pixar went on to create dozens of great films. And they even were then, of course, bought by Disney for a whopping $7.4 billion. I mean, not a bad investment by Steve Jobs at $5 million for Lucasfilms. So we can see there's some really great elements, I find, of teamwork that comes out of this story. So let's break those down. Some of the things I think came out of this. For me, one area is extreme transparency. They found by doing those dailies, it allowed them to actually create a feedback culture and actually share everything with the team. Additionally, they made decision-making transparent and faster. They were able to set aside and say, we're going to make these our decision makers, and now we're going to be able to take feedback quicker. It's great. And then finally, this resolute belief in team mission and vision was huge. They knew they weren't going to go in this just to make Toy Story. The reason they were Pixar is that they wanted to disrupt the movie industry. They wanted to show how you could weave technology and storytelling together to create a brand new experience. So for me, it was a great story. I loved hearing about it. Some great elements we can pull out. So let's move on to another example. So we've heard about Toy Story. Another one we have, let's talk about the world of sports. And, hey, we're at an Agile conference, so many of us are familiar with the ideas in rugby, Scrum and so forth. So I want to talk to you about rugby, and then specifically, I want to talk to you about one of the top teams. Many of us know the All Blacks out of New Zealand. Now, we know, a lot of people know them for things like their ceremonial hakas at the beginning of a match, just to kind of get them pumped up, that rah-rah. But they're a damn good team. One of the things that we've seen is that, as they started looking at World Cups, they're one of two teams that have won 3 World Cups. Also, since records were being kept for ranking, they've held the #1 spot. So again, they're a great team. Now, we could talk about how they play, but the thing is with the All Blacks, it actually comes down to how they look at teamwork. And one thing that not a lot of people know is that the All Blacks actually focus in on this idea of team mantras. They have 15 of them. These mantras are the things that help them to essentially figure out how they team together. Some of my favorites of these 15, I'm not going to share all of them, but I'll share you some of my favorites, are going to be things like go for the gap, train to win, and probably my all-time favorite, no dickheads. So we can't have egotistical people on this team. This might seem amusing, but the thing is it's super powerful. When you think about this idea of these mantras, it basically represents that the All Blacks are focused in on this idea that teamwork is required to, again, get to that goal. That becomes that's above all else. And so from these, I can actually extract a couple more elements for us. Things like trust our people to rise to the challenge. This idea comes from that idea of go for the gap. We have to believe that people are not going to necessarily become complacent. They're going to go try to get better. We have to believe that our people will do that when the opportunity arises. There's also this idea that we need to have the right skills. This goes back to train to win. We've got to make sure that, yes, I might want to play rugby, but I never have. I need to build those base skills first, and then I can learn how to play as a team. And then finally, no one person is bigger than the team. We've got to put ego aside. We've got to make sure that when we're going out there, we're thinking about the team and not our individual contributions to it. So again, some more good elements we've extracted. So the last example I want to tell you is one a little bit more unconventional, and it's one that if you've listened to the Atlassian podcast, Teamistry, or maybe you've checked out our Work Life blog, you might have heard of. And this is the story of the Ford Taurus. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm not from around here. I'm actually from Detroit, Michigan. So that's Motor City. It's the motor capital of the U.S. And Ford is, of course, that's where Ford was founded. And in the 1970s, Ford was in a really bad place, financially, just culturally. They were at the brink of bankruptcy because they were simply making bad vehicles. One of the things that's always been an acronym, in at least where I'm at, is the idea that Ford stood for found on road dead. That was the idea of a Ford. Because, you had your competition. You had your Toyota that was making sleeker designs, better higher quality cars. They were doing this through things like interconnected teams. They were doing it better. And so Ford said, we have to change something. We have to go and when we do our next vehicle, we have to think about how we actually not just develop it differently, but team around it differently. And so the Taurus became that Hail Mary pass for them. And so when they started looking at how they were going to do this, leadership said, we've got to do a couple things different. First, they said, we've got to bring the groups together. No more siloed departments. We've got to look at the value stream. How are we actually all contributing to it and actually work together? You can't just have design and engineering being, not knowing what each other's working on. We have to partner with that. They also wanted to focus on this idea of empowering teams, and they came up with this idea of what they called directed autonomy. It was the idea that we're going to give you a direction, we're going to give you a vision, but we want you to take that forward. So the design, the way things were put together, those were all established by the teams. Ford just said, we need to go accomplish these sort of goals. Now, this is highly different from what it was in the past. There was stories from Ford where people like the CEO were making design decisions. The CEO wasn't qualified to make design decisions, but they would raise it to the top because he was at the top of the chain. The last thing I think they did was super impactful, and this was this idea of trying to bring more psychological safety into their environment. One of the things Ford had experienced was when people had issues, they wouldn't bring it up because they were afraid of retribution. They were afraid they were going to get in trouble. And so they said, we can't have that culture on the team here. And so when the Taurus was set to be released, and this would be early 1985, the team found that they weren't going to be ready. They needed more time. Now, in an environment without that psychological safety, they probably wouldn't have said anything. They'd just rush to get it done, and it might have actually caused Ford to crumble. But instead, they actually went to Ford and they said, we need more time. They went to the leadership. We need more time. And the leadership said, okay, we'll give you that time. They said, we trust you. And it was that demonstrated that psychological safety in the environment. And it's a good thing they did too, because later that year, later in 1985, the Taurus was ready and it was released. And you know what? It was a hit. Ford or Motor Trend named it the car of 1986 almost immediately. And it actually went on to inform a lot of the design patterns and teamwork patterns that you see in other companies like GM and Chrysler. So it was really cool to see that play out. And I really think it brings out some good elements here. Things like cross-functional teams versus siloed departments. We see the power. We see that in our world too. This idea that create direction and autonomy. We can create direction and autonomy by giving some of that direction, by creating some of that vision. And then finally, we got to build in psychological safety from the start. Ford found this and others have too. So we've covered 3 examples of some non-conventional teams that kind of share with you some of those ideas. For me, I think I can distill all those down into some core elements. And so I'm going to call those my team alchemical elements. These are going to be the things I think are true about each of these stories. First one I have here is, I believe purpose creates autonomy. I believe if you give people a purpose, that from that, they'll take that autonomy. They'll take that power and move forward with it. I believe that decentralized decision-making actually fuels empowerment. Give people the ability to make their own decisions, and they'll do it. High trust with psychological safety, I believe it accelerates team cohesion. Yes, we can trust each other, but we need an environment to do that in as well. We need to be able to speak our minds and talk about things. So having that is paramount. And finally, embracing uncertainty sustains growth. So for me, it's being okay, just like in Pixar where they said, you know what, we don't want to get all the feedback necessarily, or we can't wait for all the feedback. We got to act now and react as we go. So for me, these are, as I look at my research, these are the 4 big areas that I think make the most sense in terms of what's driving good teamwork in these stories. So awesome. Got my question. I've got some research. So I think it makes sense for us to move into that hypothesis phase now. So when we think about a hypothesis, a lot of times, I think many of us are familiar with this. It's a testable, falsifiable thing that we believe. And the thing is, I can go into what a hypothesis, into how you construct one, but we don't got time. And honestly, I'm just going to take the kitchen show approach, where I'm going to pull the souffle out of the oven and show you, huzzah, it's done. And so I want to show you my hypothesis that I have. So the hypothesis I have after thinking about my research is that I believe that embedding practices into a team will help clarifies purpose, decentralizes decision-making, builds psychological safety, and normalizes uncertainty, actually will result in a team's full potential being unleashed. Now, that's a lot, right? You're like, whoa. So, but here's the thing I want to point you to. Those are those team alchemical elements, that clarifying purpose, that decentralized decision-making. These are the things that I believe will result in one team performing better than another team. Going back to that core question. So cool, something I can test now, something I can play with. So let's do that. So time to get into the fun part, the experimentation part. So here what I want to do is I want to share with you some practices that, again, leaving today's session, that you can actually do. I love hearing talks, but the one thing that I always look for is is there something I can do afterwards? Well, the next 5 things I'm going to share with you are things that you can do on Monday. And what you'll be able to see is I'll kind of talk about each of these experiments and how that relates to our hypothesis. But you'll also be able to see things like there's links on the page to allow you to get to more information on how you facilitate an activity like this. One thing I'll encourage you to do as we're going through that, think of 1 or 2 of these that you would like to do. You think, oh, that could work really well with my team. So keep thinking about that as we go through it. So let's start it out. When we go through these, the first one that we're going to look at is one from Google, and it's Google's rework initiative. And it's called the team vision exercise. I'm a big fan of this exercise because it's simple. A lot of teams struggle with what they try to do. They struggle with creating goals. They try to figure out, well, why are we here? And honestly, sitting down and having a kind of a light conversation about this can unlock a lot of knowledge and a lot of motivation around it. For me, what I've done with these sorts of things, I actually worked with a team in the financial industry who was honestly struggling to build goals out for the quarter. And like, we don't know what kind of goals we should do. And I says, well, let me bring up a Confluence page, and I created 5 sections. I put values, purpose, mission, strategy, and goals. I said, let's just walk through this. So we talked at first about like, what are our values? What's our purpose? What's our mission? And I says, okay, and that was helping to solidify. We kind of all aligned on those, and we then say, well, how are we implementing that? What's the strategy? And then the cool thing is, by the time we got to our goals, they were like, well, then our goals have to be X, Y, and Z. I was like, oh, see, that's awesome. It's amazing how going out there and giving that purpose enabled that autonomy to say, yeah, this is what we have to do to accomplish these things. So again, super easy exercise, great one to run with your team if you're struggling with any sort of that alignment. Another one I have is from Management 3.0. We had Jürgen here today, and some of the work he's done with Management 3.0 is amazing to build teamwork. And for the one I love here is delegation poker. It's one of my favorites. It's this ability to, what I like to call is make the implicit explicit when it comes down to decision making. A lot of times we don't know who makes decisions. We point to our manager and we say they make the decisions, when in fact they're probably the worst person to make those decisions. What we have to do is we have to go out there and kind of actually call it out. We have to make that explicit. And so for me, one of the things I like to do is I'll actually play delegation poker with a team. We'll go ahead and I'll say, well, what are all the decisions that y'all have to make? And we'll come up with a list. And I said, well, now let's all get together, maybe a physical room, a Zoom room, and I'll give them playing cards. And we'll say, all right, for each decision, I want you to tell me where you think you are when it comes to this decision. Are you a advise, a number 5, basically saying, you know what, I want to give you my feedback, but I don't want to make the decision. Maybe you're a tell, maybe you're a 1, you're like, no, I need to be the one making this decision. Well, it gets interesting because now we can have that conversation. If all of a sudden I got 3 people who are saying, no, I want to make this decision, we've got to determine if one of them is the one that really needs to make it, or do we all have to align that we're going to agree on this one? We have to have 3 people that have to agree to make this decision. And again, what it does is it helps encourage some of that autonomy because people now have said, hey, we've made explicit this decision-making pattern, so I can make these decisions. I know who to go to. And it frees up people like your managers, your leads, to be able to focus on team development. So another great one there. Now, from Atlassian, we have the Atlassian Team Playbook. If you haven't heard about it, it's our kind of repository for practices and plays that we use to kind of help us with our teamwork. And one of these is called the Health Monitor. It was developed a few years ago, and it's kind of gone through some iterations. But the idea of it is it's sort of like a retrospective for your team. It's sort of like this ability to not just think about the work, but like, how are we working? What's healthy? What's not healthy? Maybe we're looking at, do we have alignment for what we're doing? Do we understand what are the things that we're measured by and what value looks like for us? And the idea is you walk through this activity and you focus on, all right, what are the things that we need to, we want to improve on? What's not so good right now for us? And what's cool is what will happen is, let's say you score a little bit low on shared understanding. Well, we've got a couple plays that you can then run subsequently to say, hey, these are considered good plays to help build shared understanding on your team. So things that you can do to start kind of thinking about, all right, I want to nudge this a little bit better this next quarter. And so when you run these, I typically recommend you run them on a quarter-by-quarter basis. It's just like, again, like a retrospective. You never want to get complacent with it because this is how you start getting that high-performing team because we're conscious of how we work. Another one from Atlassian that I absolutely love is a ritual reset. I'd venture to guess that most of us in here have at least, have calendars that are probably a little bit too full of meetings, or a lot of those meetings are simply just a waste of time. They're not run good. And a lot of it has to do with just poor meeting culture. Well, the ritual reset is an activity that we've developed to basically say, well, let's take an inventory. As a team, what are all the meetings, the things that we have to do that take our time? And then let's start classifying those. Let's reflect on them. Are they things that we should keep because they're working? Oh, I think our sprint planning is really good, so we should keep this activity. Is it something that might just need some improvement? We need to change it up a little bit. We're doing refinement and the entire team's there. that's a bad use of everybody's time. Like everyone agrees, let's maybe change it up a little bit. Maybe do some pre-work and then we'll meet at a shorter period of time. Cool. And then there's those things that aren't working, the things that we should get rid of. Probably the most important thing. A lot of those meetings, a lot of those things probably could be an email. It could be a Slack message. It could simply be a Confluence page. These would be the things that help you take control of that time. It helps build that autonomy for the team to say, we own our time. How do we use it the best? So that ritual reset is a great way to do that. And then finally, and probably my favorite of all of this, is team improv. Now, improv, I like to think, is you just need a room or a Zoom and a great question. And you can get people kind of thinking outside the box. It's a very additive experience, too. You're focused on building on top of people versus actually tearing things down. You increase that creativity muscle, and you actually help people become a little bit more okay with uncertainty. So if you're interested in improv, if you go to that link, it'll give you a list of a ton of different improv activities you can do with your team. Now, as a bit of a mad scientist, we're talking about alchemy, I can be considered to do some crazy things. And so I think the next thing we should probably do is maybe a team activity and maybe a little improv as a group. What do you think, guys? You gonna do it? Yeah. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. Here in the room, I want you to find a partner. Could be next to you, could be behind you, could be in front of you. Find a partner. All right, and then for those on the watching remotely, I will be your partner. So if we found our partners, all right, now what you need to do is I want you to pick someone to be the lead. Who's going to be the one that is going to be the leader of your partnership? Usually I look at it and I said, hey, maybe who's got the most colorful pair of shoes on? Find some mechanism. Okay, find those leads. And for those remotely, I will be your lead. All right, leads, listen up here. When I say go, you're going to start moving around. So I'm going to have you all stand up here in a moment. You're going to start moving around, just letting the motion flow through you. Like, what are you feeling? And then I think you know where this is going, folks. Followers, your goal is to mimic that motion the best you can. It's called mirror, mirror. All right, and those watching remotely, you'll have to mirror me. All right, so we got our partners. Now everyone stand up. Everyone stand up. All right, I'm going to give you 60 seconds. And your time starts now. All right, just start moving around, folks. Again, your goal is to mimic. Followers, just mimic. Those on the phone, follow me. We've got 30 seconds almost. Keep going. I love some of the movements here, people. This is great. Oh, good job, everybody. Good job. Keep moving. We've got 20 seconds. I know you can do it. I know you can. All right, 10 seconds left. Make it strong at the end. 3, 2, 1. Good job, everybody. Good job. Good job. Yeah. Especially after lunch, you kind of need that, right? Just gonna get the blood flowing a little bit. I love that activity. And again, you can do that. I mean, imagine if you go to your team on Monday and at the end of Scrum or your daily stand-up, you say, hey, we're gonna do an activity. Encourage you to do that. All right, so I've covered 3 bodies of knowledge here with great practices. Again, the Atlassian Team Playbook, Management 3.0, Google's Rework. Each of these have plenty of great practices in here. And what I encourage you to do is find some that work for your team. The goal is about getting better. It's about finding what helps our teams. And each of these bodies provide some really great information. So I encourage you to check them out. So I think that's done with our experimentation now. So if you think about it, the rest of that scientific method, we're kind of going into analyzing the data and communicating the results. But the problem is, we actually haven't finished the last stage. We actually haven't done that experimentation yet. We need to go out there and actually say, if we're going to try to figure out, if we're going to prove that hypothesis, that those team alchemical elements really do unlock team performance, we're going to try it out with our teams. So here's what we're going to need to do. This is where I need your help. You're going to come into play to help us do some experimentation and help figure out how do we unlock this potential. So my call to action to you, and this is why I asked you to kind of think about which one of those practices kind of resonated with you the most, is I want you to go out there and try one out. Go to your team next week and say, hey, I want 30 minutes of time. I just want to try this out. Maybe do a little improv. Maybe you're going to do a ritual reset. Do something to see if you can help improve your team. And then afterwards, see if it actually worked. Say, hey, maybe we did a ritual reset. Did it actually shave some time off our calendars? Did it get some of our meetings to be a little bit more intentional? Awesome. And then finally, probably the most important part here is I want you to share that out. Share it with the world. Tell people about your story. I would love to hear about it. Share it with me on LinkedIn or Twitter, hashtag Interpersonal Alchemy. One of the things I like to do at this point too is to incentivize you to do it. Because you know what? A lot of speakers will come up here and they'll be like, yes, share this out there. And you imagine not many people do that. So I want to incentivize you a little bit. You know those icebreaker questions I had at the beginning? Well, those are just a few of some that I've collected over the years. So over the last decade as a coach, as a scrum master, and so forth, I've been collecting them. I probably have about 250 icebreaker questions. Well, I've distilled that list down into what I believe is the 100 best icebreaker questions, the ones that will really get people thinking and make you like the talk of the room. If you send me a story, if you connect with me and say, hey, I did this activity, I'll send you those icebreaker questions. So just reach out to me. Just let me know. I would love to share those with you. And then finally, one last thing around Atlassian that I wanted to share is, for us, what we're trying to do is we're trying to focus on how do we help our teams, not just with our tools, but with our practices. So we've actually introduced a new initiative that I just want to briefly tell you about. And it's this idea that when we work with customers, we want to help them think about the practices that they apply on our products, not just the products themselves. Maybe you're having team issues. Maybe you're struggling with your team health. And all of a sudden you do a health monitor and you're like, ooh, we're not in a good spot. Or maybe you just have some really bad meetings on your calendar. We've actually have a set of coaches now internally within Atlassian that are going out and helping our customers with this. So if you're interested in having a doctor, we're calling it the Dr. Wow program. Ways of Working is our wow. Reach out to us. Let me know. Either go to that email address or contact me directly. We would love to talk with you because it's a free service. It's something that we know that better teamwork is going to lead to better outcomes in the end of the day. So with that said, that's all I got today, folks. I appreciate the time. Connect with me. You can, again, hit me up on LinkedIn. There's my Atlassian email address. Happy to answer any questions you have through there. And I think now we'll open up for some questions here. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, Mark. I believed everything you said with that outfit.
I know, right? It makes it with the outfit.
All right, guys, we're gonna have one question from the chat and one question from the audience. There's one that a lot of people voted for, so I will read it out. It's a long question. Bear with me.
I'm listening.
Right. Okay. I feel what you showed will get great results if the today non-high-performing teams consists of highly motivated individuals. However, what to do with an established not high-performing team where everyone is considering the team good enough and actively objecting change, e.g. doing a retro?
So a lot of the things I've seen with this is like, whether it be as a coach or a scrum master, or just someone in my organization, is that a lot of times teams will find themselves in a spot where, like you say, they're okay with the status quo. The goal here, though, is I'm trying to subtly help them change. And so this is where something like that activity, you start introducing things to help them kind of think a little bit more creatively. So maybe you can't get them, they're like, nah, I don't want to do a health monitor. But maybe you say, well, hey, you all open for like at the end of stand-up, we could do a little improv. Like, I'm going to try this activity. Experiment with me. I found that really helps with teams that are stuck. Because again, your goal is to build empathy with them, understand what's kind of keeping them in that spot, and then kind of meet them where they're at and just help nudging them a little bit more. Introducing a lot of change. Like if you came to a team like that tomorrow on Monday and said, we're going to run a health monitor, they're just going to roll their eyes at you. Your goal is to find those subtle ways to help that team, again, maybe examine things from a new perspective. And it could be as simple as a small little icebreaker question, too.
All right, thank you. Do we have a question from the audience? All right, I give you another minute. Next question from the chat. What is your best advice to provide an environment for psychological safety in a team?
I'm a big believer that psychological safety starts with leadership. I think, yes, as a Scrum Master, as a team member, I am responsible for helping to create that environment too. But honestly, it's just like the Ford example, where if Ford leadership would have said, oh, that's not okay to be done at that point, any kind of psychological safety I've built up into that environment, it's just wiped away. And so for me, the biggest advice I have is, find those leaders out there in your organization who are fans of helping their teams, and see what you can do to help encourage them to reach out and help encourage those, demonstrate it. Because again, this psychological safety is less something you do and it's more something you see. And if you see it, then you start practicing it from that perspective. So that's what at least I've done in my environment, is work with those leaders to say, I'm trying to get you to where you're at, but I need your help to get there too.
All right, just give me a sign whenever you're ready. Have you any suggestion for games to enable and motivate introverted people and foster proactivity within the team?
I think for me, I'm a big fan of, actually, I'm running a game right now called the Pirate Ship game. It's a game around roles and responsibilities, where you go, and if you Google it, the Pirate Ship Roles and Responsibilities game, it's a whole activity to help us, again, have fun with thinking about roles and responsibilities. So that's a great example of, again, you try to add fun. It's almost like you try to disguise the work part with the fun part and be like, yeah, we're doing a pirate ship. But then all of a sudden we say, oh, I see my role in that. The other things I like to do is I use liberating structures a ton. And I actually, one of the things I find with more introverted people who might not want to speak up as much, is activities like the 1, 2, 4 all activity, which basically gets everybody at the table to actually add something. And a little story I've got on this is I was running it with a team where we were developing something brand new. It was a brand new application. And one of the engineers was a really quiet individual, but always had great ideas, but never could get them out. And so we said, we're doing brainstorming around how we're going to solve a problem. I said, well, let's do this 1, 2, 4 all. He says, we're all going to brainstorm on our own. That's the one. We're then going to come into pairs and determine, based on our ideas, which one should win out. So each pair will come up with a single idea. Then we're going to come into quads, 4, and then we'll come together. And you know whose idea came to the very top? It was that quiet engineer. And it was so cool because they loved that. They were like, wow, I feel heard now. And so it's finding those activities like that can help bring them out. Again, you don't want to go out and be like, what do you think, Kyle? That's not going to make Kyle feel good. You want to find a way to bring it out without, again, putting someone into a very bad state.
All right. Does anyone, I think it still refers to you, have experience with surveys on team health? If there's a works council, because of performance measurement, personal data, etc. Not sure if work council is translated correctly, but do you know what is meant by that?
I think so. So we at Atlassian, one thing we do is we do quarterly surveys with our teams to find out, again, how are people feeling? What are the things leading to lower team morale? What's helping teams? And so for us, we actually that data then comes out and we provide it out to all of our leaders. And the idea is that our leaders are coached around saying, hey, find one thing out of that list that you want to work on. Sometimes you might have a dozen things. And we say, no, focus on one thing that you want to do. Because ultimately, one of the things that is problem with things like surveys and trying to improve from there is we get overwhelmed with the results. We're like, ooh, that's a lot of stuff we got to focus on. So just like a retrospective, within an organization, when the leaders look at how they want to take that feedback in, I always say, talk to the team, find one thing and try that out. Because guess what? You're going to run another survey in a quarter, and now you can see, hey, how are things a little better? What's the next thing we should try?
Right. All examples pretty well lined out that with a good vision goal, teams can become enthusiastically and high-performing. How can visions goals be settled for the whole company or parts of it when middle and top management is busy with other stuff?
This is where you have to make space. So actually, another great example is for Atlassian. So we use OKRs, a form of OKRs in Atlassian for our goals, and we have our larger vision and mission. And so every quarter, we actually have a process where we take time and we say we have to invest the time. if you have middle management who doesn't have time for goals, you're not going to just say, well, I need you to do the goals. No, that's not going to work. You actually have to find that. You have to say, we have to pull back on some of the things we're doing and focus on that. So actually, we have a whole team in Atlassian that focuses on saying, hey, we're setting aside time, we're doing this. There's commitment goals that we have around saying, hey, we got to get certain things done by this point. Like I'm thinking about my what would be for us Q3 starting in January. We're already starting to think about our goals then as an owner. And I've got a couple meetings I'm going to have over the next month to kind of figure those out. And it's something, again, we became really intentional about it. Otherwise, you get to January and you're like, I don't know what we're going to do. I haven't had time to think about it. So that's one of the big things for us. Be intentional.
All right. Do we have any more questions from the audience? No. Okay.
Awesome.
We will find a few.
Well, I'll be around. So if you have any questions, let me know.
Anyway, so a personal question. So how do you determine what is or when is a team high performing, not just medium high performing?
Oh, yeah. Well, what we do is we actually look at 4 key elements for us. And this is kind of based into our team health index. So you saw that figure I put up there, 13%. It's based on this idea of a team health index. And it's made up of things like our teams, do teams have the right environment that they work in? And we think of that, or climate, we call it. And that's essentially, do we have things like psychological safety? Do we feel things are there? Are we performing? So, we might have a great environment, but if we're not delivering, that's a problem. And so we say, well, we got to look at that. We also look at things like engagement. Do people want to be part of this team? Is there cohesion there? And then finally, we look at things like sustainability of the team. Is the team something that can continue on, or are we doing a firefighting thing, and that's what led to it? Because honestly, yes, a lot of us have high performance examples, but many of those, just like mine when I was at Boeing, it was a firefighting mode. And yes, we continued that on afterwards, but it took us going through that. So we look at those 4 things and we ask teams to kind of focus on those. Because if you can get each of those moving in a good spot, you're likely to get yourself into a sustainable, high-performing mode.
All right. Mark, thank you very much.
Oh, thanks for having me, folks. I appreciate it.
It was really great. Please use the opportunity to ask Mark questions later. I think he's hanging around for a bit.
I won't wear the coat.
And yes, you're
awesome.
free to.
Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you.